Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. I can't really believe that this is my 37th and final AGM before I pass the baton on to my lucky successor, Alan Kinder, but it is. I've called my presentation "So Long and Thanks for All the Fish." This was said by the dolphins to the humans when they left the world before it was obliterated to make a hyperspace bypass. And it comes from the fourth book in the Douglas Adams Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's a kind of humorous way of saying thank you and goodbye. In this presentation, there is quite a lot of data on the slides. Because it's my last AGM presentation, with your permission, I won't talk about that data. Instead, I thought I would share a few little stories about some of the activities we've been involved in and about how some things came to pass. So I started to work for the Regional Studies Association on the 3rd of December 1986, when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister in the UK. At that time, Regional Studies had been publishing since 1967, and it had grown to 6 issues a year. Now we publish 6 different journals, and they either are already or soon will be very significant in their field. Last year, we had 1.2 million downloads across the portfolio. This year, we will exceed that number. The journals have innovated. We have early career editors. We know that this is career building, and we have digital social media editors across most of the portfolio. So rather than talking more about the journals, I thought I'd tell you a little story about John Agnew. So growing regional studies as a community and starting 5 additional journals is personally very significant for me. It's also significant for the Regional Studies Association, and that's because it gives a voice to researchers, and through careful social media curation, we're able to amplify that voice around the world and into the policy community. Starting new journals isn't easy. It carries risk, and it needs investment, not only from the RSA, but also from our publishers, Routledge. But one thing is true, that all journals start with an idea that is articulated to someone else who has the power to do something about it. And I want to tell you about one of these times. So Martin Jones, who is now Vice-Chancellor of of Staffordshire University, at the time he was a lowly Pro-Vice-Chancellor at Aberystwyth University, he had an idea for a journal which would look at territory from a political and governance perspective. And he had his eye on John Agnew as the founding or inaugural editor-in-chief. So we hopped onto a plane and flew to Los Angeles, and we stood in an airy atrium outside John's office for a little while John finished with a student. The student came out, we knocked on the door, and in we went. And we pitched the journal to John, and he hoed and he hummed, and we left with no commitment from him. A week later was the RSA board meeting, which was held in a pub called, after the board meeting, we went to the Coronet pub on the Holloway Road, which is near the new Arsenal football stadium. And Martin said to me, "He won't do it." And I said, "I think he will." And about an hour later, while we were still in the pub, John phoned and he said, "I've given it some thought and I would like to do it." So that was a real hurrah moment for us. And I thought John would accept. And the reason I thought it was because he kept picking the pitch, the brief up, and then putting it down. Then he'd pick it up, and then he couldn't leave it alone. So I left it in his office. Now, John was an amazing inaugural editor. And that journal, established in 2013, is now going to publish 10 issues a year from next year under the new stewardship of Klaus Dodds. It's an amazing achievement for what is still a relatively young journal. And I tell you this story because during a 45-minute meeting, John took on a serious labour of love that lasted 6 years, during which time he gave real service to the regional studies community. And service to the community is a theme that is really important to me, and which sits with our values as an organisation. I want to acknowledge all of the labour that is put in around our journals. So to our editors-in-chief, our editors, our referees, our editorial advisory boards and authors, all of the work that you do is selfless. It is all community facing, and it really does make a difference within the community. So thank you very much for that. Alex. So books, there were no books when I joined the RSA. We had a lot of grey matter. It didn't go very far, and it certainly didn't have much of a voice. We now have the Regions and Cities book series, started being published with Jessica Kingsley Publishers, then briefly with the Office for National Statistics, which was privatised in the UK, and it's been published now for a long time with Routledge. So sometimes in life, there is serendipity. And one of the things that I've really cherished about the RSA is that work can spill over into your private life. Sometimes that's where the magic happens. So in the early days at RSA, there was only me and a very part-time accountant called Saeed Maleki. And the first book that we were involved in was called Beyond Green Belts. I didn't know very many people in London or many organisations, and I needed an artist. So I went to a local art shop and I asked the man behind the counter if he could recommend anybody. And he tentatively suggested that he could help out. His name was Chris Ranger. He ended up changing career from working in a retail in an art shop to being quite a well-known book cover designer, working for Jessica Kingsley Publishers, and he did covers for us for many years. He's still a friend of mine today. This series has been managed by editors-in-chief and is now supported by a committee. And although articles remain the currency for appointment and promotion in our field, most researchers, I think, believe they've got at least one good book in them, and for some, it becomes their magnum opus. So Ron Martin and Joan Fitzgerald have been the most recent editors-in-chief, but as a community, we owe so much to them for their work on the books. And I would like to acknowledge all of the people that have helped to promote and work on our book series. So thank you for doing that. Alex? So during my career at the RSA, we've done a quick count up on via using the annual reports. And we think that while I've been there, we've organised 210 conferences, 135 webinars, all of those since 2020, in 30 or more countries. Some countries, of course, we've visited many times. In 2020, we had 5,200 attendees. Now, that was face-to-face, but largely online. In 2016, we had our highest number of face-to-face attendees at 3,750. So the reach of the RSA is actually surprisingly wide. So I have a piece of advice related to conferences and events for Alan. I hope you're listening, Alan. And my advice is don't be the last person to leave a conference centre the day before the conference starts. I was once trapped in a revolving door at Aalborg University in Denmark, caught in the quarter segment where you couldn't either go forward nor backwards. And I had to sit on the floor for 45 minutes while a security guard was rustled up to unlock the door and release me. Similarly, and some years later, I was trapped in a lift in Pécs, Hungary, in a hotel, organising a conference. I was on the floor there for about an hour and 3/4 before the lift company came to rescue me. Also, beware the plenary speaker with an errant sense of humour. When we organised our conference in Angers in France, Ronnie Hall, who was then Deputy Chef de Cabinet for DG Regio, he was a plenary speaker. He hadn't arrived in time for the closing plenary when just before the session started, the fire alarm went off. So the whole conference evacuated to the car park. While I was standing in the car park fretting, I took a mobile phone call. And it was Ronnie telling me cheerfully that he'd just jumped onto a train in Brussels to come to the plenary. Remember, we're in Angers in France. So I almost had an anxiety attack. And as it turned out, he was stood behind me in the car park and just thought it would be quite funny to see how I reacted to that news. So thanks for that, Ronnie. All of our events involve very large numbers of people, but the most important people in those events are the local organisers. In addition, there are speakers and chairs. Everybody is a volunteer that is involved in our events. Our events help researchers to refine their ideas, to get feedback, to build research partnerships. They're actually really integral to the research process. And I'd like to thank everybody that has been involved in one of our events. So thank you. Alex? When I joined the RSA, we had a reserve of 25,000, and my predecessor, Gloria Frankel, who'd also been in post for about 20 years before I took over, was incredibly proud of that. And she had every reason to be. That was a really decent sum of money to have in reserve in those days. We have a lot more money than that behind us now. And that matters because as soon as we reached a tipping point, the RSA board began to commit to serious grant giving. And so far, we've funded 250 researchers from more than 40 countries, and we've invested coming up for 1.4 million. By the end of the year, it will be. We have 6 research-based grant schemes, and then we do travel grants in addition. Why does this matter? Well, it matters to me. It matters to me enormously. In 2013, a very young Dieter Kogler won an early career research grant of £10,000 for work on international knowledge flows and spillovers. He used that grant as a pilot and then won a prestigious European Research Council grant of 1.5 million euros to carry on his research, establish a centre, build his career, had PhD students under his tenure. It really, that startup grant led to something that really was quite important to Dieter, but had positive spillovers for people around him. Research is absolutely at the heart of the RSA. And I am really pleased that during my tenure, we've become sought out funders in the field. We deliver micro grants that are not available from other institutions because they can't afford to do them. We know that early career grants are career building, and our other individual grants allow for pilot studies and seed corn funding. So I'd like to say thank you to the very many people who are very busy on our research committee and who go through so many applications every year. Thank you. Alex? RSA was extremely English when I joined, but we were policy engaged. We're extremely global now. We've always had a level of policy engagement, but there was a time that dipped away. It is certainly back with a vengeance. And we deliver policy engagement in part through our sister foundation, RSA Europe, which is a private foundation set up after Brexit as a way of putting us into the centre of Europe, allowing us to engage with the EU institutions and to be a recipient of EU money. Through RSA alone, we have Policy Expo grants of £15,000, and related to that, a Policy Impact book series, for which we've now published 9 books, with 2 books forthcoming, which all of you as members will be receiving in coming weeks. We know that this series matters because the policymakers tell us it does. So I thought I would tell you one story about policy engagement. It's really hard to know as social science researchers what the work we do, what difference the work we do makes in the policy community. Some years ago, I was at a conference in the Czech Republic, and Dirk Arne was there, who was then the Director General of DG Regio at the European Commission, and he invited me to have coffee with him. He sat on a big leather sofa, and I sat on a small armchair across a coffee table from him. His private office staffers quite quickly became nervous because the conversation got quite heated at points, and they quickly scuttled over and sat on either side of him on the big sofa. I felt as if I was being interviewed and under a bit of pressure. Dirk had asked me why more students didn't study cohesion policy at PhD level. And I was really annoyed. I said to him there was a certain arrogance in that question, and that the Commission did nothing to encourage or work with or engage with students or early career researchers. And so I threw it back on him. What are you prepared to do to make a difference here? Dirk Arne turned out to be a complete superstar for the RSA and for the regional studies community. It was through him and his backing that we were able to set up the EU Regions Week Masterclass, which has run most years, not this year, but will be back next year. So in my career, one of the things that I've learned is it's individual people that make change possible. And so many people are working on policy engagement, either for the RSA or through the RSA. And I really want to recognise the contribution you've made. Thank you. Alex. So geography matters. We all know that place matters. Even when the world took a turn to the sectoral, we didn't change our position. The RSA has a wide and rich territorial network of its own, and that takes a lot of people working extremely hard. So thank you very much. I've just snuck in at the bottom of that slide that I've personally managed 7 RSA office moves in 37 years. So place matters to geography, to Regional Studies Association staff. Next slide, please, Alex. Governance can be dry. Finance can be quite dry as well, but those two things are the backbone of any organisation. And during my time, the RSA has been so well served by its board and its committees, all of whom are volunteers. I've worked with 10 chairs in 37 years. They have been very different in style. One thing that they have held in common is that they have the right values in serving and supporting the regional studies community. They've really lived up to the association's values of being a leading and impactful community. So each chair has come with a quirk. In no particular order. Mark Hart, as good friends do, we bickered for 3 years, but together we introduced development planning to the association. Gordon Dabinet taught me the skill of looking around corners. He always thought strategically. He was an amazing mentor. David Bailey always said he worked with me for 6 long years. But he did give me the space to innovate and to be entrepreneurial, and that was incredibly important to me. He also taught me that it's okay to prop the bar up till the early hours after a conference. That was okay too. Andrew Beer introduced me to the notion of jet-lagged early morning walks before board meetings and conferences. We normally finish those with a flat white. Mark Tudor-Jones taught me that a COVID-based strategic walk can be too dry, and as soon as the bars opened, we always slipped in for a quick one. Jessie Poon, more recently, was a wonderful steadying hand all through the turbulence of COVID. I will always be grateful to her for that. And Neil Lee, so grateful that you've stayed, my friend Neil, even though the first thing I did when you took up office was tell you that I wanted to retire. So many of my friends at RSA have started through people working on the board and the committees, and I owe a lot of my workplace happiness to you. Next slide, please. Of course, as an association has a number of external friends, and I just want to mention 2. Firstly, our friends and colleagues in the EU institutions. You've been wonderfully loyal to the RSA and to RSA Europe. You've kept engaging with us. Daniela, my colleague, and I have really loved working with you. I would particularly like to mention long-standing friendship with Elisa Rolla, with Lewis Dixter, and more recently with Alessandro Reynaldi. It's been an absolute privilege, and I do feel secure knowing that you're holding regions at the heart of Europe. And then secondly, I'd like to acknowledge the contribution to the success that has become the Regional Studies Association owed to colleagues at Routledge. in particular to David Green, Jessica Vivian, Jonathan Manley, who's retiring at the end of this year, Sarah Bird and Carolyn Haynes, who any of you who've published in the journals will know Carolyn because she's the person that copy edits all the articles. You have been integral to the financial and journal success of the association, and you've enabled our journal's expansion and our community's voice to be heard. So thank you for putting your trust in us. Then penultimately, my colleagues in the office. Some of my colleagues are almost invisible to the members, but that doesn't mean that the work that they do is not absolutely critically important. So I want to thank my colleagues who are actually in the office with me. I also want to thank our external team members, particularly colleagues at Yellowback Publishing and Kitty Bai, who works in our Chinese division and for area development and policy. But particularly to Daniela, to Judy, to Lisa, to Suede, to Alex and to Nicola. You're amazing, and the RSA would be a poorer place without you. And with you, it's become a warm, caring and active association. We're really lucky to have you, and I've been so fortunate to work with you. Suede, we're really sorry that you're leaving us. I feel better knowing that you're taking up such a fantastic job opportunity in Australia, and I know that you will stay in contact with us. I will miss your steady hand on the governance. And then finally, Alex, I'd like to thank the members, because it is true that an association is only as good as its members are active. At the end of this year, we will have the highest membership that we have ever had. Just want to finish with one quick story. Bryony Goodwin Hawkins joined the RSA. It's a story she tells. She joined by accident. She didn't work in the field. She came along as a co-author on a paper to one of our annual conferences. Absolutely loved the vibe, the atmosphere, the sense of fun and commitment at the conference. Changed her research interests, joined the association, and in her own words says she's never looked back. That's testament to the warm and inclusive community of researchers and policymakers we are. And I would like to thank you all for that. You can go to the last slide, Alex, please. So in closing, I would just like to say it's been my absolute privilege to serve the community, to serve the association. Oh, struggling here. I've worked really hard, I've strategized really hard, and I've laughed really hard. I want to thank you for the opportunity that you've given me. I am really looking forward to my retirement. I have a job lined up. I've done my first shift already as a barmaid at the Caxton pub in Brighton. Caxton, as some of you will know, is somebody that operates a printing press, so it seems very appropriate that I'm working there. If you're ever in Brighton, come to the Caxton and I will very cheerfully pull you a pint. And I would like to close by wishing my successor, Alan Kinder, all the luck in the world, and I really hope that you enjoy this job as much as I have. Thank you.